Today, we are talking to an attorney who has served as a prosecutor in child welfare. Join us today on Fostering the Future.
Welcome to the Fostering the Future podcast, a show about all things child welfare, dependency, adoption, and foster care. Here are your hosts, veterans in the world of child welfare, Jack and Kat.
We believe that every human has incredible and equal value regardless of what side of the courtroom we sit on. We hope that everyone feels welcome and accepted here on Fostering the Future.
Make sure you follow us on Facebook or Instagram as Fostering the Future Podcast, or check us out on our website at fosteringthefuturepodcast.org.
This is Kat, and I'm here with Jack, and today we have a special guest, Rob Callahan, who is a former ASA and currently is a defense attorney for Callahan and King.
Hey.
Welcome, Rob.
Welcome.
Thank you. I should make a disclaimer, which is that I was an assistant district attorney as opposed to AUSA. AUSA is for the federal prosecutors, but I was the state prosecutor.
You know, I don't even know the difference. Until just now, I didn't know the difference. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, in terms of what we do, it's essentially the same job. It's just for different agencies.
So, Rob, let me ask you a very serious question. What is your favorite drink at Starbucks?
A grande white chocolate mocha, non-fat, no whip, with a shot of caramel.
Rob, let me ask you, what was your first experience with foster care? When you were growing up, did you know any foster kids? Did you know any social workers?
I didn't know anyone in the foster care system, to my knowledge, growing up. Although, asterisk to that, my little brother, who's 13 years younger than me, we fostered to adopt him and then adopted him into our family. Now, at that point in time, when he came along, I was 13, and so I was a punk, and I didn't appreciate being dethroned from my role as the favored son in our house. But yeah, he's actually a miracle baby. He was born 3 months early, 1 pound, 8 ounces. In hindsight.
Did you say 1 pound, 8 ounces?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Wow.
And now
30 years ago.
He is a strapping young lad. I mean, his biceps are ridiculous. He's a great guy. I love him. But yeah, I was a real brat. And so I didn't quite understand what I was living through at the time. And it's only when I look back at it, when I say oh yeah, we went to that hearing and we did this thing, and I kind of put the pieces together and realized just, the miracle that his adoption was.
I'd love to interview your mom.
Oh my goodness. She can talk.
Well, I know, because I look at your Facebook.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah. That's a positive thing for a podcast.
It is, and I always she kind of fills my cup, when I see her post on your Facebook. I'm like, oh, Mrs. Callahan,
Oh.
No, that was a long time ago when it comes to the foster care world. Mm-hmm. The rules were really different. And, I don't know what they were because I was 13 also, or maybe 12. So that, that was a really different world. And gosh, I'd love to hear about that. And I'd love to hear more about that from you, too. That had to be a really incredible experience. Rob, can you tell us what drove your decision to go into law?
I knew I wanted to be a lawyer at age 11. And that stemmed a lot from the fact that your audience can't see this, so I'll say it for the audio. I'm an African American, and I grew up mostly in the South, particularly Louisiana. And at that time, there was just a lot of what we now call microaggressions that our family experienced on a regular basis. And so I remember stories of my mother coming home almost, it seemed like daily, just crying in tears, talking about some incident that happened at the grocery store or at the school or at the, just wherever. And I remember saying to her, well, you should just go tell the police, just in my naive, probably like 8-year-old voice then, and her just kind of politely, discrediting or disregarding my suggestion. So that continued until at some point around the time that I turned 11, I realized that there were these things called lawyers and that they actually fight for justice. And so at that point, I was sold. I knew at that point that's what I was going to do. I didn't have the best grades in high school. High school was just survival for me. And I went to college, and college was pretty good, although my grades were not great, which made getting into law school difficult. And I managed to get myself into Baylor Law School. I had a lot of extracurriculars. I think I am a pretty decent writer, and so I sold them on my admission application essay. And so I get to Baylor Law School, and after fighting tooth and nail to get in, I have to fight tooth and nail to get out because Baylor Law School was academically rigorous, I think is the best way to say it. A lot of different programs in the country it'll be the situation that your first year is your hardest year, and then it gets progressively easier before you graduate. It's a 3-year program. So at Baylor, your first year is hard. It's difficult, just as difficult as everywhere else in the country. But then third year is when we have all of our advocacy exercises in conjunction with our study of professional responsibility and advanced rules of civil procedure, advanced rules of criminal procedure, and just a lot of rules of evidence, ins and outs. And so our third year actually becomes the hardest year. So getting out was difficult, but I managed to do it by the skin of my teeth. And, that experience for me, I think really set the standard. A lot of my classmates did well academically, went to go do great things in big law and the like. I remember looking at them and their success and not begrudging it, but just realizing I had something to contribute to the legal community, but I couldn't get a shot, and my grades preceded me and in a lot of cases precluded me from getting those types of interviews. Now, if you look at my advocacy grades, there's not an advocacy class that I didn't get an A in. I was on the mock trial team, but for when it came to test taking and the like, I just could not figure it out. Well, lo and behold, I'm 43 now, I think. Lo and behold, I found out when I was 40 that I'm slightly dyslexic. So that explained a lot of my academic performance. So all that to say, what I tell people when they're considering going to law school, when we interview interns, when we interview new hires for our legal staff, I tell people, I can teach you how to do the law. Like, the rules are in the book. Anybody can figure it out, but I can't teach you to have good character. And so what's most important to me, I don't care about your grades. I care about you as a person, like what your character is, because I can't train character. So that's the medium length story version of how I got in and out of law school, why it was so difficult, and part of the philosophy of how we hire at our office.
I mean, that's amazing. Having dyslexia, even mild dyslexia, that's a roadblock that is almost impossible to overcome, especially without accommodations. That's really, really challenging. I can't imagine reading legal documents, having that obstacle to overcome because they're difficult to read for anybody. And having an additional roadblock had to be really challenging.
Well, I didn't realize that it was particularly challenging at the time because I thought it was normal. So I thought that it was everyone else's normal as well. And I mean, the closest I ever got to figuring it out was that, after I read something in a book for about 30 minutes, my eyes would just get tired. I could not stay awake. And none of my other friends around me had that problem when they were reading the material. And we read a lot of material in school.
Yeah.
So, that was as close as I ever came to maybe figuring it out. Other than that, I understood everything. And so I was just so used to powering through everything, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, grin and bear it, all that stuff. This is law school. It's Baylor Law School. It's the boot camp of law schools.
Yeah.
Suck it up and go. And, that I just thought that that's how it was for everybody.
After you graduated, you had a different job before you started your own company, though, didn't you?
Yes. So in 2006, I graduated from Baylor Law School, and I was licensed in the fall of 2006. Actually, I was working for a private defense firm for a little while. Started in the spring of 2007, working for the district attorney's office, prosecuting everything that you can imagine. Initially, I was doing smaller things, but by the time I was done after 4 years, I was doing everything up to, capital murder cases. I say capital murder as mini cap, technically, for those that are in the know, but, sexual assault. So everything that you can think of, from, traffic ticket to the most heinous crime you can think of. In 2011, I left the district attorney's office and went into private practice. And I didn't intend, actually, or didn't want to go into private practice, at least not initially. But I felt very strongly, as a believer, I'm a Christian, and I felt just very clearly that God was telling me, I want you to stay here in Waco. I want you to open your own private practice. That was a real jarring idea for me, because I had developed this moral clarity as a prosecutor that made me think that you couldn't possibly do justice or be involved in the administration of justice if you're on the defense side of things. And so the Lord really had to work in me and humble me and change that perception. And so that led to, in 2013, I formed Callahan and King, which is the firm that I'm now one of the partners of, with one of my dearest friends. Fast forward to 2021, we have 4 attorneys, and I think that we've got 6 professional staff on hand, including recently a licensed master's social worker. And we have a 5th attorney that will be starting as soon as he gets his bar results in November. So we're growing.
I had no idea you were that large. That's amazing. That's a lot of growth.
Big time.
You're really, not only are you big time, but you're big time Waco. That's big.
Hashtag shiplap justice.
Hashtag Waco town. Anyway, can you tell us what experiences you've had with the foster care system and with the department within your current role and within your role as a prosecutor?
So my first experience in the foster care system was as a prosecutor, and that was working besides CPS, which is the Department of Family and Protective Services here in Texas. We refer to them as Child Protective Services. And the thing that was really interesting is that I didn't have a real grid for what I was walking into, and the stories of brokenness and hurt. It was very overwhelming. It was a lot on the heart. Initially, I just stepped into that role really covering someone else. That wasn't my normal routine as a prosecutor at that point in time. Now, I should stop here and flag something. In our county, in McLennan County, the department, CPS, is represented by the district attorney's office. And that's not necessarily the case everywhere. So oftentimes the way that a case would come to our attention was because a criminal case was behind it. And so they were interlinked in that way. So yeah, I remember the first time that I went out to the juvenile justice system court. That's where we were having court for CPS as well. And I mean, just bawled. I was a mess. So I don't know, after maybe 2.5 years, I really started praying about the idea of getting more involved in these cases, crimes against women and children, which had a huge overlap with CPS cases, and just really felt like it was work that I needed to do. So that was my experience on the prosecution side. On the defense side, there's 2 different hats that I've worn. One is representing parents who have been separated from their children and had allegations brought against them by the department, or they're trying to work services or prove their fitness. But the other experience that I've had, and is actually the most fulfilling for me of all the jobs that I do, is working with foster parents who are intending to adopt, helping them get standing when they feel like the system is just a whirlwind of confusion and they don't understand what's going on and what can they object to and who's going to listen to them. A lot of the times they just feel like, well, I don't have any agency in the case. And so in Texas, you have the ability, if you're a foster parent, after a certain amount of time to petition the court to intervene in the case. And then at that point, you become a party to the case. So, you have all the rights to get involved in the jury trial process and to call witnesses and cross-examine and investigate and all kinds of things. And that is just super fulfilling.
I mean, that has to be really empowering to have someone like you on their side, someone who knows the ins and the outs, and especially someone who has been on both sides.
One of the things I feel like is a common question amongst foster parents here, and I'm sure it works differently everywhere, but I'm curious how it is over in Texas, where there are certain rules about who can communicate with the assistant state attorneys. I think that often foster parents are told you're not allowed to talk to them. I know guardian ad litems aren't allowed to talk to them without going through their attorney, but sometimes you feel like that's the person I'm supposed to be providing this information that I have. So are you aware of what the rules are these days over in Texas as far as who is allowed to communicate with this assistant state attorneys during a foster care case?
Our rules concerning communication are more liberal. We are informed by one guiding principle, which is that you're not supposed to have ex parte communication with the court. That's a hard and fast rule. And what ex parte means is literally one party, or like one party without the other. But that's also suggestive of interaction between the parties as well. So like, for example, it would be kind of weird for CPS to have a conversation with the ad litem, but not have a conversation with the guardian ad litem about the same thing, and just kind of keep the guardian ad litem out of the picture. The thing that's really weird is that if you're in a situation where you're a foster family, you have not intervened yet, you have no legal status, and that's the exact problem. And so therefore, you're not a side in the case. In other words, there's no harm in theory with you communicating with the prosecutor, because it's not information that you're hiding or secreting as a party from the other side.
Because you're not a side.
Because you're not a side. Exactly right. Now, the issue that I think that some caseworkers may have, your guardians ad litem, your volunteers at CASA and things like that may have with the foster families, it's one of those situations when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so you're so used to the same type of interaction with foster families. It's like, oh, this is just a whining family. Oh, this is just a needy family. Oh, they're just whining. They just want somebody to talk to. They just need to go to counseling. I'm not the person. And so it becomes hard to become self-aware enough to say like, oh no, they actually have information that's pertinent that we need to make sure that we integrate into our investigation of the case. And so they're used to people giving the wrong kinds of information to prosecutors or to the advocates. And so they don't want that happening. And so that's why it's discouraged. There's no rule against it, but that's why it's discouraged. Now, the great thing is when you decide to intervene, well, now you've got attorneys representing the bio parents. They have a voice. You've got the ad litem for the child. You've got which is an attorney ad litem. You've got the guardian ad litem, which is an unlicensed, like not an attorney, acting as a sort of private extra set of checks and balances, caseworker, manager. You've got sometimes CASA involved in court-appointed special advocates. You've got the department that's represented by often your prosecutors, so CPS. And then now add to the mix, you have this foster family that has their own attorney. They know the lingo, they know the system, and they know what to screen. And in fact, I think that the state and the other actors appreciate having another attorney involved in it, acting on behalf of the family, because we get to act as a buffer between the family and the government. And so, we get to say like, hey, this is important, as opposed to the emotional brunts, the emotional hits we take. And then, we can filter in the important legal information that they need to know and go from there. I think I would be remiss without giving a shout out at this point to our case manager. So I've mentioned before, we brought in a master social worker to our office. Her name's Hope Mustakin, and she is amazing. And she's our case manager because that is her role in all our cases is to basically act as an interface for the clients to make sure, along with all the others, but to make sure that their needs are being heard. And so just even within our firm, we know that we have the tendency to potentially discount or get jaded and just sort of start seeing everything the same. And it's her job to sort of help us break through that haze and say, no, seriously, you need to pay attention to this. Just really advocate for the clients just within our office. So I think that the system definitely needs that. If we need it, everyone else does too.
I think that's fantastic because everything that you just mentioned is a real issue. And I know around here, we are all tired because we are all taking that emotional hit. And so it's really nice that you have this this rule that adds benefit to this world, where we're able to provide permanency to children. So all these parties that you just mentioned, what happens when they don't agree? The CASA, the GAL, the case manager. What happens when we get to court and they don't agree?
Unfortunately, it happens more often than not that not all the players, even on the side of advocacy for the child, agree. We had a case where the department and the ad litem and the guardian ad litem were all on the same page, with the thought being, I don't really know whether or not we have grounds to terminate. So the child had been removed, child was living with the family for a year, and the grounds alleged, when I say grounds, I'm talking about the state's petition saying this child doesn't need to be in this home because of abuse or neglect or, whatever have you. They had grounds to remove, but since they removed, the biological parents was kind of sort of doing their part. They're sort of working services, but not supposed to get a job, but couldn't, allegedly. It was supposed to live somewhere, but living with parents, and just, it was, exercising visitation regularly, but it was just kind of like just doing the bare minimum to kind of get by. And so by the time we got in on the case, everyone was pretty much resolved that if they went forward with termination, they weren't going to win. And so they might as well reunify. And we were able to do some investigation and show some private investigation using our firm that showed that this father was actually unfit. And one of the things that was really interesting, there was a moment where, there's drug use allegations that had been part of the basis for removal in the first place. And a bad trip led to a handicap on the part of the biological father. And so he was paralyzed on one half of his body and, was doing some things, but not doing enough and not trying enough. It wasn't, because of his disability. Well, we get into court. This is a jury trial. We're, fighting for termination. And we were able to show that even though he was told by his doctors that he can't drive because he may have a seizure at any moment in time, that he's still driving. And in fact, we caught him on video driving to the courthouse, parking across the street, switching so that his mother was driving the car, and then driving into the parking lot of the courthouse so that in case anyone saw him, it looked like the mother was driving the car. And it's one of those moments where, it's one of those kind of Matlock moments where we have the video of it. Our soon-to-be fifth attorney was actually the one that recorded it with another one of our staff. It was great. We set him up and asked all the questions about, how you can care for the child with your disabilities, and are you obeying all the different things that you've been told by your doctors, and are you obeying the different expectations that's set out by CPS, and you're not driving, and yeah. And then we just, blew it open with the video. And so by the end of it, CPS, the ad litem, the guardian ad litem, we were all able to be on the same page. This, jury, you should terminate. And the jury did terminate so that the foster family could adopt. But, it wouldn't have happened if they hadn't had an intervener. That foster family wouldn't have been able to adopt without that intervention.
I know that every case is different. And obviously, every journey is going to go in a different direction depending on what comes up. But what is the general process as that assistant state attorney that is handling the case?
Yes. So as a prosecutor, we don't even necessarily get every case that comes into the system in Texas. So, you start off with, let's say that a mom has a baby at the hospital and the baby shows to be positive for methamphetamine. So CPS is called. They remove the child at the hospital. They do what's called an emergency removal. And then the biological parent has the right to have a hearing on whether or not that removal was rightful or not. Then there's an investigation that's involved. And so you've got the investigative phase where you have one set of caseworkers and one set of case managers at CPS. And at the end of the investigation, they can make one of three conclusions. They can say that the allegations they believe to be true. So they have reason to believe, RTB, that the allegations are true, or they are unable to determine, UTD, whether the allegations are true, or they rule out the allegations, RO. If they do anything other than rule out, then the investigation arm closes and then they send the case to the legal arm, basically. What's important for biological parents who have had their children removed to understand is that when you get the letter saying case is now closed, no further action necessary on your part, CPS is not saying, oh, our bad, here's the child. What they're saying is that we've made a determination. It's one of these three things. And because it was either unable to tell or we're able to verify that we do think the allegation is true, now you're going to the legal arm. At that point in time, that's when the case comes on the radar of the prosecutors because of a number of different processes. So one of them in our county, we have prosecutors have an interdisciplinary team meeting that will include, literally at the same table, different schools, like police agencies from different ISDs, independent school districts. It will include staff from the Child Advocacy Center. It will include CASA. It will include the prosecutor for the state representing the department. It will include case managers or case workers at the department, and they will basically call cases in. This is an informal team huddle where they have a docket that they go through. Again, informal, no judge in the room. And they're basically saying, okay, case A, what's going on with this? And the case worker will say, okay, so this is the situation and this is what I think that we should do. And the prosecutor's there from the beginning taking notes before the file even comes across the prosecutor's desk, basically. And so very early on, the prosecutor has a lot of sway in the direction of the case and what sorts of things CPS should be doing or shouldn't be doing. It gives opportunity for the department to ask the prosecutors and the other people in the room questions about, what do you think? Is there enough here? Is this justified? That sort of thing. And so they'll, go through a whole few pages, like 100 cases or whatever, in a period of time of this meeting, and come out of it kind of, with every caseworker or every different agency having an idea of this is what we should be doing with the case. If the case is in legal and it is going to be the case that the department is going to seek termination, they file a petition, and that's when the case that basically we heard a rumor of possibly a month ago now becomes formal. We're filing court paperwork saying we're going to take away this person's child unless they satisfy the department that they're going to live up to their obligations as a biological parent. And I'm speaking inclusively. I'm talking about the state, the prosecutors. Very early on, prosecutors have the ability to give insight on the case. This cuts both ways. One of the good things about it is that if the prosecutors are the people that are also handling the CPS case, if there's a criminal case connected to the CPS case. So like, let's say, for example, someone decides to rob a bank with their child in the car seat in the back. And then they run out the bank with the alarms going off and wearing the mask, and they've got guns, and police are shooting the car, at the car, and the kid's in danger. When you've got a criminal case, and then you've got the CPS going at the same time. So the good thing about that being handled by the same agency is that there's no breakdown in communication. So the left hand doesn't have to worry about what the right hand is doing, because they know they're unified. The problem is that if the same agency is handling it, the DA's office, there is a temptation or a push or a felt need to see success on both sides as a prosecutor. And so you'll see cases of, arguably prosecutorial abuse where the state is putting the screws to the defendant on the criminal side because they want to make sure that the bank robber ends up with a conviction, and therefore they have a stronger case for termination on the civil side. And in fact, in Texas, having a felony conviction or being on probation for a felony is a ground itself for removal. And so there's potential for abuse there because the same agency is acting, tied to those two things. And it's really hard to judge what's in the best interest of the child when you're so focused on, I've got to get this guy, and I'm going to get him over here, and I'm going to get him over there.
There's definitely been abuse within the system, so I can see how that would happen.
Can you tell us about your best day as a prosecutor?
I had a case as a prosecutor where this woman had endured just years and years and years of domestic abuse, and she just had no self-worth, just no sense of self-worth. And she had actually reported the abuse a couple of times, and somehow or another, her husband, the defendant, had talked his way out of them. They didn't really stick. The cases weren't prosecuted. And so we were fighting as prosecutors against the defendant himself, but also kind of against the abused wife, who was just kind of like, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to get my hopes up because it never works before. And this is just, it's not going to go well for me. Ultimately, it's going to be worse for me. And so we were able to get a guilty verdict, and she changed. It was like a flip got switched as soon as she realized that, a jury thought that my testimony was true and credible. They believed me. He's now subject to being responsible for his actions. She became another person. Just her countenance lightened. It was just a different person. It was like the world was seeing her for the first time. And,
she mattered.
Like she mattered. Yeah, she mattered. And, it was just a little subtle thing. I've had, that what the sentence was in that case isn't important. The guy went to prison, but the point being, that was an opportunity that I had to confer dignity onto the life of a person that mattered, on a survivor. I had a really kind of haunting experience as a defense attorney that I would call my best day. There was a client who was going to jail for prison for about 8 years, and his wife and their young son, I'm saying young, I'm thinking 2, maybe 3, were outside the courtroom waiting for him to be sentenced. And I had no previous interaction with them. But after he had been sentenced, they pulled me aside and asked me about what happened in the case. And I was telling them about, how he was sentenced and, how parole works, and just how long it would likely be before he got back out. And, I'm just the human moment of realizing I'm explaining all this to the wife and the mom and, child of this client. And the day before, I had brought, we keep toys in our office so that when we have clients that have young children, they can feel like, you can play here, you can make noise here. Nobody's gonna, bark at you, yell at you, or anything like that. Kids are welcome here. And we rotate the toys out every so often. And the day before, one of my children's Elmo doll stopped working. And it was one of these tickle me Elmo kind of things. Uh-huh. And Tried changing the batteries. The batteries weren't the problem. Just couldn't get it, flipped all the switches, tried turning it on, tried pressing his stomach really hard. And Elmo just wasn't going to laugh. He's just dead. Okay, fine. It goes in the toy basket. So I'm talking to her and I realized, I have an opportunity here to bless this family. So I ran across the street where my office was at the time and I grabbed this Elmo doll. I know the thing doesn't work. And I go downstairs and across the street to the courthouse where I see them waiting on the bus. And I walk up to the kid and I hand her the doll. I was like, hey, will you take care of this Elmo for me? It doesn't work. She squeezes the doll and it laughs and starts talking. Oh
my gosh, that's weird.
And this is a true story. I actually, when it happened, I put it on my Facebook. So if you search somewhere in my profile,
I'm gonna search for that. Yeah.
It was crazy. I mean, I was just like, what just happened?
Oh my gosh.
And I told my paralegal what happened, and it was like it was just the wildest thing that I felt like it was a miracle. So that was the best day I've had as a defense attorney.
Oh my gosh.
Not because I haven't had victories. Like, I mean, we get not guilty verdicts. We return families that are, separated as advocates for biological families or parents. We advocate on behalf of foster families who intend to adopt. I love adoptions. It's one of the most meaningful things that we do, but that was a high. That was wild, and nothing has come close to it.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
That's pretty special.
Rob, what's been the most difficult day for you?
Man, you have to narrow it down. I had a client within the last 30 days that committed suicide on the day of his sentencing.
I'm so sorry. That's terrible.
Thank you.
That's so hard.
And that's the first time that I've had that happen. And the other thing that was difficult about it was that he was going to court to plead guilty and sign for 30 years. So he was going to TDC. He wasn't going to be coming back for a while. He absolutely did the crime. It was pretty heinous crime, but he's still worthy of dignity and being seen as a person created in the image of Christ. And so, it was just hard. And one of the other aspects of it was just realizing that, how society looks at him, sort of a thing. And so, so that was hard. I think when I was waiting for the jury to bring back their verdict in that case that I mentioned with the gentleman who was partially paralyzed because of drug abuse, I mean, we just ran a roller coaster of emotions. And in fact, I think, if I remember correctly, that they ended up having to break for the evening so that they started deliberating one day, broke for the evening, and then came back and deliberated the other day. And these were the adoptive family, the foster family, were dear, dear friends of mine. And just the idea of them not having the ability to take these children into their home and make them forever family, like that was heart-wrenching. The jury did, fortunately, decide to terminate, and that freed them up to be able to adopt. But there was just so much adrenaline and stress. And so, like, after the case was closed and the jury was dismissed, I went out into the hall just bawled.
It's so hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's really touching to hear an attorney that is so compassionate, because a lot of the times, like, they're so formal that you don't think about how the cases really affect them personally.
Yeah, don't tell anyone though, okay?
I'm going to tell everyone.
Could you give us a word to describe foster care?
Promise.
Oh, I like that. How do you see your role in foster care?
In whatever capacity that I serve, my job is to perform excellently so that my clients feel the value of their worth, that they feel heard, that they feel seen, that they feel like they have someone fighting for them, that they feel like they have someone to walk the long road with them. There's a lot of things about the system that
are routine that aren't necessarily right.
That is so true.
Yeah.
And so having the opportunity to speak into a specific circumstance and to really shine a light on it and to speak into it and to change or impact it. I thank God for my law degree. Like I can't imagine not having the ability to have an impact in that way.
Everybody should be so well suited for their role and be able to make an impact in such a way. What would surprise most people to learn about your role?
I think what would surprise most people about my role is a little bit unique to my office. We're certainly not the only office that's like this, but it's definitely true of us. We meet people, even foster children, in their time of greatest crisis. And especially if they've been in the system before, they're sort of used to the machine doing what the machine does. And I think that it surprises people when they realize that our firm is actually taking the time to slow down and see them and to really walk with them. That's our job, is not so much to represent people, but to really walk beside them, to be their agent and their advocate, speaking from a place of empathy, of really standing next to them. And so I think that what would surprise people is, regardless of what side I'm on, I'm always trying to do the right thing. If I'm representing a biological mom or dad, I'm trying to do the right thing. If I'm representing a foster family, I'm trying to do the right thing. If I'm serving as an ad litem, I'm trying to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And shedding the stereotype of like, oh, well, this is just a lawyer and lawyers do what lawyers do, paid hired guns, that kind of a thing.
What do you want people to know about attorneys and child welfare?
That we're not okay.
Wow.
Check on your favorite attorney. And I think that we as a profession don't even really realize that we're not okay. There's a reason why there's so much drug abuse, alcohol abuse, suicide rates when it comes to attorneys. We deal with really heavy things. There's a great book that I had the opportunity to read this year called Trauma Stewardship, and it's all about secondary trauma. It's all about when you are a witness to what the system does day in and day out to other people. You're witnessing their trauma. That traumatizes you. And it's the same if you're a, EMT, if you're a doctor in the emergency room, if you're a teacher in a school district where the parents just, aren't engaged and the school system isn't engaged. If you're working in, the Department of Family Services and you just case after case after case. You just can't possibly carry all that alone.
And you can't.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think my most significant trauma fatigue was when I was a caseworker. And bringing that up is the perfect segue, because we really wanted to ask you about your own personal self-care routine. What are your ways to combat compassion fatigue, trauma fatigue from the secondary trauma that we know you experience on a regular basis?
The first line of defense for combating compassion fatigue for me has been the people that I'm working with. We've been really intentional about creating an office environment that is inclusive and loving and caring and for each other, for our staff. The reason that that's important, that's nothing that needs to be unique about Callahan and King. That should be the case in every office. We've chosen like-minded individuals who, again, going back to that issue on character, I can't teach you to have good character. We've chosen other believers who are, like-minded, justice-oriented individuals who, when I don't feel like waking up in the morning and going to the office, I go because I know that I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with the person, that I work beside. So that's the first level. We actually, in our office, we have a weekly time of, we call it Jesus time, but it's kind of loose. because we're not necessarily always praying. We're usually checking in on one another and just like, hey, what's going on in your life and how are you doing? You know, to the extent that's possible, like with the exception of like, you know, some rare schedule stuff, that's a mandatory meeting. So everyone in our office is participating in it. So we're all connected in each other's life in that way. And then I didn't grow up with, you know, counseling and the rhythms of mental health care and self-care. That wasn't part of my experience until the last, you know, 3 years or so. And it's just been so rich. I've been going to counseling myself. We recommend counseling for everyone that we work with, oftentimes for our clients. There's a point in time where we actually were working with, and we were about to work with again, a local counseling firm to sort of subsidize counseling for people in the community that are otherwise not able to pay for it. And so, you know, I go to counseling. To my great chagrin, I work out as often as possible. And, you know, I'm not an athlete, y'all. If you could see the video, like imagine the Michelin Man, but, you know, like the tires haven't been changed from black and, you know, the tie is a long tie instead of a bow tie. Anyway, that's, you know, I try to work out as much as possible and encourage people in our office to go take walks and things like that, so that we're just releasing those endorphins. I am prescribed and I take antidepressant medication. So, you know, I have a doctor involved in that team with, you know, the counselor. I try as much as possible to relieve myself of the what feels like an obligation to be plugged into everything that's happening in the world. Because, and this is difficult because you want to know what's going on in the world. You want to be informed. You want to know, especially about injustices, but we were not built to know everything about every situation, everywhere, every time, especially in the pandemic where there's just, you know, harrowing news day after day. And there's, you know, all these different debates about whose life does matter, who doesn't, should I wear a piece of cloth for the good of my neighbor or not? Like all that stuff just really wears you down. And so I try to unplug or be intentional about what I'm digesting. So audiobooks, podcasts, things like that, that I've met with varied success on unplugging from social media.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. But it's always rich when I do. If I can force myself into a rhythm, it works so much better, and the world keeps spinning without my needing to be informed of that particular detail. The news will come to you. I've found, like, I don't need to know when, you know, the breaking incident happens. It will be on my computer. Someone's going to mention it. Like, it's okay for me not to know first thing.
It's true. That's, I have found that to be true. I work long days, 2 days a week, like very long days. And it like never fails. Once or twice a month, someone will mention something one of those days. And I'm just like a deer in headlights. Like I have no idea because I haven't been on any social media and I haven't been watching the news. And all I've done is work for 2 days. And
oh my goodness. What's that like? That must just be so nice.
There have been several huge events that have happened on those days. One of them was the Capitol, when the Capitol was
the attack on the Capitol.
I've lost my words.
The siege.
Yeah, let's call it what it is.
The attack on the Capitol, January 13th. That was one of them, and then there have been a few other. There was an Afghanistan attack. So I have a few people that know that I'm usually working on those days, and they will keep me relatively informed. But I'll like show up somewhere and I'm like a deer in headlights. I have no idea what you're talking about unless I'm seeking out the news because I'm not on social media and there's no time. I'm not even returning text messages for the most part. I know exactly what you're talking about. The news will come to you.
Yeah, no, for sure. It will come to you. What's interesting is last year I reached a point where I was almost like physically nervously shaking from just all the stuff. And I asked a couple of guys to commit with me, like, hey, for 24 hours, we're not going to consume the news. We're going to spend this time in prayer and just kind of see, like, you know, what God has to say to us and touch base on the other end of it. And I started journaling in that moment. And the journaling has become a rough draft of a manuscript for a book that I'm hoping to put out. And so that has actually, that outlet has been really good for my self-care, because the things that I need to say and want to say, they don't have to go unsaid. It's just that I'm looking for a more receptive audience, pearls before swine and all that. And so hopefully that will pick up. And if it doesn't, it was just a really good exercise in journaling my emotions. So
yeah. I have done a little bit of that in my notes in my iPhone. Like when I've had frustrations and I've thought, this is like my letter to the editor and I'm the editor, but I would be really embarrassed if someone went back and read through them.
What has been the biggest struggle that you have faced in child welfare?
I think taking care of my own mental health, that really is the constant struggle, because we're involved in some sort of form of crisis, whether it's, even if I'm working for a foster family, I can't ignore the fact that, 10 feet away from me down the table is a mother that's sobbing because she, is afraid that she's going to lose custody of her children and never see them again. And so that struggle is real and it's ever present, and it has to be acknowledged and named, and then it has to be addressed.
Yeah, I definitely feel you on that. And I think I've mentioned before, like specifically speaking about one of my kids, though this is probably true for all of them, under no uncertain terms should he ever be parented by his biological parents. However, watching her have parental rights terminated was one of the most traumatizing experiences of my life. And it definitely, it broke me. It broke my heart. It ripped me out from the inside, not just for my son, but for his mom. And again, I would be terrified to have him alone in a room with her.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be with her. She shouldn't be responsible for any children. She's not a safe person, but to be present in that moment when her rights were terminated is devastating.
It's just devastating because she has value, and we haven't found a way in this world to acknowledge that and allow her to have a piece of him in a safe way.
But even in other cases, like when you go to court and you're there for your hearing and, there is another situation going on and you overhear part of, a termination happening or filing for termination. I might not know the child or the parents or the foster parents or even any of the parties involved. But when you see it happening and understand the consequences to all parties involved, obviously to the child, regardless of best case scenario for them and the healthiest option for them, the tearing of that biological connection is horrendous. And to be there for any part of that part of the process is devastating for any onlooker. So I can't imagine to be the attorney on any of the sides having to go through that and feel that pain along with them.
The person with the power.
The person with the power.
The person with the power. Yeah.
When I talk to juries about biological parents, when I'm representing the biological parents, one of the images that I use is, imagine that feeling when you go to the mall on Christmas and your child, runs away from you for a second, hides under the clothes rack or something like that. And you go look for the child and they're not on the clothes rack. And then you go look, under the, display and they're not there and that kind of a thing. You're like, oh my gosh, where's my child? And that panic that you feel in those moments. And, most of us, hopefully, we're only experiencing that for a moment until we find our child again. But imagine if that feeling in your gut never went away.
I think that's a really good illustration. And when I was probably my first or second year of college, I had this horrible nightmare and my mom is she's loving, she's gregarious. People adore her. She was one of the best things that happened to my education because the people that met her, adored her.
And she can't hear this podcast, so it's not for her benefit
It's really not. It's really not. I had to interpret for all my parent-teacher conferences, but the teachers didn't even want me there. They just wanted her. She's just made of ooey-gooeyness. And, but I had this nightmare, freshman, sophomore year of college, that she looked at me and said, I don't love you anymore. And I was like, what? And she's like, I don't love you anymore. And it was just this this horrible feeling of I just don't love you anymore. get away from me. I don't love you anymore. That's all I remember. But I remember it was like the most like horrific feeling in the world, like what a Dementor's kiss must feel like in Harry Potter. If anybody, I don't even know if you watch Harry Potter, Jack. You probably don't. And
I've seen Harry Potter.
Yeah, but you're not into it. I'm like into it.
A Potterhead.
So,
I enjoy it. I've read the books.
Okay,
I've read the books.
I've read the books. All right,
tattoo.
I'll take it. So it was like waking up was such a relief. Like waking up was like like you cannot replace your parent.
Yeah.
You cannot, like when nobody else likes you, you have your parent who loves you. But what are some of the biggest struggles you face working in your role as an attorney in Waco Town?
I think that bringing the machinery gears to a halt when everyone in the system is so used to, this is how we always do things. I'm a hammer. That's a nail. That's a nail. That's a nail. That's a nail. No, that's a
great
screw.
Analogy.
One of my coworkers says all the time, like for clients that get really frustrated and are hurt by the system, he says, you're not wrong, but the system ain't right. And that feeling of helplessness, that like I don't have a position of authority and the ability to just say this is the right thing and this is what should be done. Mm-hmm. Everything has to be hashed out in this adversarial system. That's one of the biggest frustrations in my role in working in foster care. And so, if you have, a judge that, he's got a docket that's got, 25 cases on it and they're already running late and you're getting close to lunch and, you got a caseworker that doesn't even really know the case and they're just reading somebody else's notes. You're at a status hearing and, the state's just saying that this case is like all the others. We want to make sure that you keep this child in foster care and don't do a monitored return at this point, judge. And we've got the ad litem just, kind of looking through their notes and just kind of like, judge, what they said, that circus, that's a huge frustration for me.
What can you think your community can do to prevent more kids from needing to come into care?
I'm afraid that this might sound like a really idealistic, optimistic, naive answer, but just the involvement of the community, like to really be a community means that we're living together, playing together, operating together, functioning. We're a part of each other's lives. We care about one another. And so knowing, for example, that your neighbor has a problem with, drug addiction or, there's a lot of traffic coming in and out of their house kind of a thing. You have no ability or authority or moral authority to speak into their life if you're just a passive observer, just sort of looking down at them and being like, crackhead, whatever. And so therefore, when, CPS comes knocking on their door and gets involved and the child is removed from the home, it's in a way it's too late. The thing has progressed too far. I'm not saying that we have an obligation to tie people down and make them tell us about their lives and things like that. But the point just being that, empathy, compassion, involvement, investment, it goes a long way. And I think that it's really tempting to stay comfortable and to remain inside of a bubble and to kind of look at my four and no more. But if you can do something that's going to help someone long term. I'm not talking about, every week I'm, doing this for so and such because they just won't get their life together. But if you have the ability to really invest in someone's life, that is a form of prevention, right? Because if they're successful, if they've got a working job, if they've got childcare, if they've got this thing going for them, then they've got more resources, they've got more support, they've got a community behind them. And so hopefully they won't end up in the situation where, there's a need for the system to foster the child.
So there is a researcher, Bronfenbrenner, who totally supports what you're saying. Those systems being in place are what help people to be successful. Especially children, help children to be successful in the long run. But we need those systems. We need systems that overlap. We need next door neighbors who also volunteer at our schools. We need people at our churches who also teach a dance class. We need people who work at our grocery store who we also see in the crosswalk. We need those systems in place. We need people who we can be accountable to and people who can help us, when we need help. So I think community is very important. I think your answer was very insightful.
So what are your goals to make positive change in your community?
Well, we are in the process of working on our formal mission statement because for so long, we know each other in our office. We know each other in our office. We know how we operate. We know what we generally believe in and what we're excited to see happen in our community. But it's so important to write down, this is what our vision is, because that's what we go back to. And so our base mission is to make the promises of justice real for our community. As we interrogate that, one of the nuances is that we say we can go to bed rested if we hold the powers that be accountable. They sit up and take notice that we're involved in the case and that the process is fair, whether that's because they fear what we bring to the table or whether it's because our involvement convicts them.
That's powerful. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah.
This was really enjoyable.
Appreciate it, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat and Jack. I appreciate what you all are doing, and I love the voice that you bring into this space. And so I appreciate you for the work that you're doing.
Well, I have been thankful for the voice that you bring into this world and the civil rights world and the advocacy world for a long, long time. So I'm glad that we got to spend this time together today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure you subscribe and follow us on social. We hope that you join us again next time and keep on fostering the future.